When someone tells you their record, in sports, in business, in life, what do you listen for? The wins. Always the wins. 40 wins, 2 world championships, a career that spans decades. That is what makes the highlight reel. That is what goes on the resume. That is what people applaud. But there is another number, a number that most people skip over, minimize, or pretend does not exist. 13. 13 losses. 13 times the preparation was not enough. 13 times the outcome was not what was planned. 13 times the walk back to the corner felt longer than the walk in. Welcome back to the Discipline Code. I am your host, and this is episode 4, The Art of Losing Forward. In the last episode, we explored what 54 professional fights teach you about resilience. Today, we go deeper. We are going to talk about the 13 losses, not as failures, but as the most powerful learning experiences a human being can have. Because here is what I have come to understand, and what the science overwhelmingly confirms. The people who achieve extraordinary things are not the ones who avoid failure. They are the ones who have learned to extract maximum value from it. They do not just lose and move on, they lose forward. And today, I am going to give you the framework for doing exactly that. Let us begin. Before we talk about how to learn from failure, we need to understand why most people do not. Because the barrier is not laziness. It is not a lack of intelligence. It is biology. In 2022, researchers Lauren Eskris Winkler from Northwestern University and Ayelet Fishbach from the University of Chicago published a landmark paper in the journal Psychological Science titled Not Learning from Failure, the Greatest Failure of All. Across 5 separate studies, they tested whether failure actually undermines learning, and the answer was unambiguous. People are highly resistant to learning from their own failures. The reason comes down to something psychologists call ego threat. When we fail, our sense of self-worth is challenged. And when self-worth is challenged, the brain does something remarkable and deeply counterproductive. It disengages. It stops paying attention to the very information that could help us improve. A comprehensive review published by the American Psychological Association in 2024, led by researcher R.W. Carlson and colleagues, identified 2 major barriers to learning from failure. The first is emotional. Failure injures the ego. It violates our belief that we are competent, capable people. And rather than sit with that discomfort, we dismiss the failure, deny it, or simply ignore it. The second barrier is cognitive. It is called confirmation bias, our tendency to seek information that agrees with our existing beliefs. Most people believe they will succeed when they take on a project. When failure contradicts that belief, the brain treats the contradictory information as noise rather than signal. As the researchers put it, and I want you to hear this carefully, although people may want to learn from failure, they often hold a competing goal that wins out, to feel good about themselves. The desire to see oneself as a good, competent person is a strong motivational force. When this goal triumphs, people disengage from failure. Think about what that means. The very mechanism that is supposed to protect your self-esteem is the same mechanism that prevents you from growing. Your brain is literally choosing comfort over competence. And this is why most people do not improve after a loss. Not because the loss did not contain valuable information, but because they never accessed that information. They were too busy protecting their ego to learn. Now here is the good news. The same research identifies clear strategies for overcoming these barriers. And the first one is the most relevant to our conversation today. Experts are better at learning from failure than novices, not because they are smarter, but because they are less threatened by it. When you have a deep foundation of competence, a single failure does not shake your identity. It becomes data, not a verdict. This is exactly what happens over the course of a professional fighting career. By the time a fighter has 20, 30, 40 fights under their belt, a loss is no longer an existential crisis. It is information. It is a data point that reveals what needs to change. And that shift from identity threat to information processing is the difference between someone who is destroyed by failure and someone who is built by it. Let us go even deeper. Let us look at what is actually happening inside the brain at the moment of failure. In 2010, a team of neuroscientists led by Julian Young published a groundbreaking study in the journal Human Brain Mapping. The study was remarkable because it used direct intracerebral recordings, electrodes placed inside the brain, to measure neural activity in response to both success and failure. This was not an fMRI scan from outside the skull. This was a direct recording of the brain's electrical activity from within. What they found was extraordinary. When subjects received negative feedback, when they failed, the brain activated a wider network of regions than when they succeeded. Specifically, failure triggered sustained activity in the pre-supplementary motor area, the dorsolateral prefrontal cortex, and the lateral orbital frontal cortex. These are regions associated with executive function, decision-making, and behavioral adjustment. And here is the detail that matters most. The brain's response to failure in the medial prefrontal cortex was sustained, lasting more than 1,000 milliseconds. The response to success was shorter, lasting less than 800 milliseconds. In plain language, your brain spends more time processing failure than success. It dedicates more resources to it. It activates more regions for it. From a purely neurological perspective, failure is a richer learning event than success. There is another piece of this puzzle that is equally important. It is called the error-related negativity, or ERN. This is a specific electrical signal that the brain produces approximately 150 milliseconds after an incorrect response. It is generated primarily in the anterior cingulate cortex, a region that sits at the crossroads of emotion and cognition. A study by Michael Frank and colleagues, published in 2005 and cited over 548 times, found that the amplitude of the ERN predicts the degree to which a person learns from their mistakes. People with a stronger ERN, a more robust error signal, showed a greater bias toward learning from errors rather than from correct responses. What this means is that the brain has a built-in error detection and correction system. It is not something you have to create. It is already there. The question is whether you allow it to function, or whether you shut it down by disengaging from the failure. And this is where the professional fighter has an enormous advantage. A fighter cannot disengage from a loss. The loss is physical. It is public. It is recorded. There is no way to pretend it did not happen. And because there is no escape from the reality of the defeat, the brain's error processing system is forced to do its job. The ERN fires. The prefrontal cortex activates. The behavioral adjustment begins. This is why fighters who lose and come back are often more dangerous than fighters who have never lost. Their brains have been forced to process the error at the deepest possible level, and the adjustments that follow are not superficial, they are structural. Now that we understand why failure is so difficult to learn from and what happens in the brain when we do, let us talk about a framework that was specifically designed to harness the power of failure for learning. It is called productive failure, and it was developed by Manu Kapoor, a professor at ETH Zurich, one of the world's leading technical universities. His research on this concept has been cited over 1,600 times, and in 2024, he published a book titled Productive Failure: Unlocking Deeper Learning Through the Science of Failing. The core idea is deceptively simple. When people are allowed to struggle with a problem before being given the solution, they learn more deeply than people who are given the solution first. Kapoor's research shows that traditional direct instruction, where you are told the answer before you have grappled with the question, actually prevents deep understanding. Students who receive direct instruction first can often reproduce the answer, but they do not understand why it works. They cannot transfer the knowledge to new situations. They cannot adapt when the conditions change. But students who are allowed to fail first, who generate their own solutions, even incorrect ones, develop a fundamentally different relationship with the material. The struggle activates prior knowledge. It forces attention to the critical features of the problem. It creates what Kapoor calls a need to know, a cognitive gap that the correct solution then fills with far greater depth and permanence. The framework has two phases. In phase 1, learners generate and explore solutions to complex problems. They will likely fail. Their solutions will be incomplete, suboptimal, or outright wrong. But the process of generating those solutions activates neural pathways that would otherwise remain dormant. In phase 2, the correct solution is presented, but now the learner has a scaffold of experience to attach it to. The correct answer does not arrive in a vacuum. It arrives in the context of everything the learner tried, everything that did not work, and every question that the struggle raised. Now, think about what a professional fighting career looks like through this lens. Every fight is phase 1. You step into the ring with a game plan. You execute it against a live, unpredictable opponent. Some things work, many things do not. You are generating solutions in real time, under maximum pressure, with immediate and unambiguous feedback. And then comes phase 2, the film review, the conversation with your coach, the analysis of what worked and what failed, the adjustment of technique, strategy, and conditioning for the next fight. This is productive failure in its purest form, and it repeats fight after fight, year after year, until the fighter's understanding of combat is not theoretical but embodied, not memorized but lived. 13 losses in a professional career are not 13 failures. They are 13 phase 1 experiences that made every subsequent phase 2 exponentially more valuable. There is another framework that is directly relevant to our conversation, and it comes not from academia, but from the battlefield. It is called the After Action Review, or AAR, and it was developed by the United States Army in the 1970s. According to Todd Henshaw, a PhD who served as Director of Military Leadership at West Point and later became Director of Executive Leadership Programs at the Wharton School, University of Pennsylvania, the AAR has been called one of the most successful organizational learning methods yet devised. The AAR is built around 4 questions, and I want you to write these down because they are as applicable to your life as they are to a military operation or a professional fight. Question 1. What did we intend to accomplish? Question 2. What actually happened? Question 3. Why was there a difference between what we intended and what happened? Question 4. What will we do differently next time? That is it, 4 questions, but the power is not in the questions themselves. It is in the discipline of asking them honestly, consistently, and without ego. The AAR is not a post-mortem. It is not conducted only after failures. It is conducted after every significant event, successes and failures alike. Because the Army understood something that most organizations and most individuals do not. You can learn as much from a success you do not understand as you can from a failure you do not examine. Henshaw emphasizes that the AAR requires a climate of transparency, selflessness, and candor. Everyone, leaders included, must openly share where their own performance may have contributed to a failure. There is no rank in the AAR. There is no blame. There is only the relentless pursuit of understanding what happened and why. Now, think about what happens in a fighter's corner between rounds. The coach is not delivering a motivational speech. The coach is conducting a rapid cycle AAR. What was the plan? What happened? Why? What do we adjust? And the fighter has 60 seconds to process that information and execute the adjustment. After the fight, the process continues. Film review, technical analysis, physical assessment, strategic recalibration. This is the AAR applied to combat sports, and it happens after every single fight, win, lose, or draw. Over the course of 54 fights, that is 54 complete after-action reviews, 54 cycles of honest assessment, ego-free analysis, and strategic adjustment. And the cumulative effect of that process is a level of self-awareness and adaptability that most people never develop, because most people never subject themselves to that level of honest scrutiny. There is one more piece of the scientific puzzle that we need to address, and it comes from the work of Carol Dweck at Stanford University. Dweck's research on mindset, published across decades of work and synthesized in a major paper by Yeager and Dweck in 2020, cited over 1,400 times, draw the fundamental distinction between 2 ways of interpreting failure. People with what Dweck calls a fixed mindset interpret failure as evidence of inability. They failed because they are not good enough. They do not have the talent. They are not smart enough. The failure is a verdict on who they are. People with a growth mindset interpret failure differently. They see it as evidence of challenge, not of inadequacy. They failed because the task was difficult, because their strategy was wrong, or because they have not yet developed the necessary skills. The failure is information about what needs to change, not a judgment about who they are. The research is clear on the consequences of these 2 interpretations. People with a fixed mindset respond to failure with what Dweck calls helpless behavioral responses. They give up. They avoid similar challenges in the future. they disengage. People with a growth mindset respond to failure with increased effort, strategic adjustment, and a willingness to try again. They do not enjoy failing, nobody does, but they do not let the failure define them. This connects directly to a concept in psychology called cognitive reappraisal. A 2023 review published in Frontiers in Behavioral Neuroscience describes cognitive reappraisal as a strategy for regulating emotions by reinterpreting the meaning of a stimulus. When you reframe a loss as a learning opportunity rather than a personal failure, you literally change the emotional response in your brain. The threat signal diminishes, the learning signal strengthens, and this is what separates a fighter who is broken by a loss from a fighter who is built by one. It is not the loss itself that determines the outcome, it is the interpretation. It is the story you tell yourself about what the loss means. 13 losses can mean I am not good enough, or 13 losses can mean I have 13 data sets that tell me exactly what I need to improve. The facts are the same. The interpretation changes everything. In 1996, psychologists Richard Tedeschi and Lawrence Calhoun at the University of North Carolina at Charlotte published a paper that has since been cited over 12,000 times. It introduced a concept called post-traumatic growth, the idea that people can experience profound positive change as a direct result of struggling with highly challenging circumstances. Tedeschi and Calhoun identify 5 domains in which this growth occurs. The first is a greater appreciation of life. After a significant defeat, the things that once seemed ordinary become more vivid. The training session you used to take for granted becomes something you value. The opportunity to compete becomes something you cherish. The second is the recognition of new possibilities. A loss forces you to reconsider your approach. It opens doors that you did not know existed. New techniques, new strategies, new ways of thinking about the problem. The third is improved relationships. Defeat has a way of revealing who is truly in your corner. The people who stay, the coaches, the training partners, the family members become more important. The bonds deepen. The fourth is a sense of personal strength. This is paradoxical but consistent across the research. People who have been through significant adversity often report feeling stronger than before, not despite the adversity but because of it. They now have evidence that they can survive the worst and keep going. And the fifth is a spiritual or existential change. This does not necessarily mean religious change. It means a deeper engagement with questions of meaning and purpose. Why do I do this? What am I building? What matters? Now, this framework was originally developed in the context of trauma, serious illness, loss of a loved one, natural disasters. But subsequent research has applied it to athletes, and the findings are consistent. Athletes who experience significant defeats and who process those defeats with the support of coaches, mentors, and teammates report growth across all 5 domains. This is not about silver linings or toxic positivity. Post-traumatic growth does not mean the defeat was a good thing. It means that the person who went through it chose to extract meaning from it. They chose to let the experience change them, not by breaking them down, but by building them up. And this is what a professional fight record represents when you read it correctly. 40 wins and 13 losses is not a ratio. It is a complete human development program. The wins build competence, the losses build depth, and together they produce a person who has been tested in every dimension that Tedeschi and Calhoun identified, and who has grown in every one. If you have been following the Discipline Code, you know that this series is built around the life and philosophy of Itai Liptz, a 2-time Muay Thai C1 world champion with a professional record of 40 wins, 13 losses, and 1 draw. We have talked about the 40 wins, we have talked about the 1 draw, but this episode belongs to the 13. Because those 13 losses are not the footnotes of Itai's career, they are the foundation. Think about what each of those losses required. First, The courage to step into the ring knowing that defeat was possible. Not theoretical, not abstract, possible, real, physical, public. Then the discipline to process the defeat honestly, to watch the film, to sit with the coach, to ask the 4 questions. What did we intend? What happened? Why? And what changes? To do this not once but 13 times. To do it when the body is bruised and the ego is wounded and every instinct says to look away. And then the commitment to come back, to return to the gym the next morning, to start the preparation cycle again, to trust the process even when the last cycle ended in defeat. What makes Itai's story particularly instructive is what happened after the fighting career. He did not retire and rest on his laurels. He took the exact same framework, the willingness to fail, the discipline to analyze, the commitment to adjust and try again, and applied it to entirely new domains. He earned a bachelor's degree in philosophy and political science. Philosophy, a discipline built entirely on questioning assumptions, examining failures of logic, and reconstructing arguments from the ground up. He completed an executive MBA at IE Business School, one of the most rigorous business programs in Europe. He built a career in business strategy and data-driven decision-making, where the ability to learn from what does not work is the single most valuable skill. He climbed the highest peaks in Africa and South America, endeavors where failure is not just disappointing but dangerous, and where the ability to assess conditions honestly and adjust plans accordingly is literally a matter of survival. And he spent years teaching children with disabilities, work that requires the deepest form of patience, the most honest form of self-assessment, and the most genuine form of commitment to showing up even when progress is slow and outcomes are uncertain. As Itai himself has said, and this is a direct quote from his published work, discipline, respect, and persistence matter more than any trophy. That sentence could only have been written by someone who has lost, someone who knows that trophies are outcomes, but discipline, respect, and persistence are processes. And processes are what carry you through the losses to whatever comes next. So here is the framework. This is the practical takeaway from everything we have covered today. The neuroscience, the psychology, the military methodology, and the lived experience of a world champion. I call it the losing forward framework, and it has 5 steps. Step 1. Acknowledge the loss fully. Do not minimize it. Do not rationalize it. Do not skip to the lessons before you have sat with the reality. You lost. It hurts. That is real. The research from Eskers Winkler and Fishbach tells us that the biggest barrier to learning from failure is the ego's attempt to disengage. Step 1 is refusing to disengage. You stay present with the defeat. Step 2. Separate identity from outcome. This is the growth mindset in action. The loss is not who you are. It is what happened. You are not a failure. You experienced a failure. This distinction is not semantic. It is neurological. When you separate your identity from the outcome, you deactivate the ego threat response and allow the brain's error processing system, the ERN, the prefrontal cortex, the anterior cingulate, to do its job. Step 3. Conduct your after-action review. Ask the 4 questions. What did I intend? What happened? Why was there a gap? What will I change? Do this in writing. Do this with a trusted advisor, a coach, a mentor, a colleague. Do this within 48 hours of the event while the details are still fresh and the emotional charge is still present. The emotion is not the enemy. It is the fuel for honest analysis. Step 4. Extract a specific lesson, not a general lesson, not I need to try harder, a specific, actionable lesson. What specific skill was lacking? What specific decision was wrong? What specific preparation was insufficient? The more specific the lesson, the more useful it is. Vague lessons produce vague improvements. Specific lessons produce specific gains. Step 5. Commit to the next attempt. This is the step that separates the people who learn from failure from the people who are merely informed by it. Learning without action is just knowledge. The losing forward framework requires that you take the specific lesson from step 4 and commit to a specific next attempt where you will apply it. Set a date, set a context, make it real. That is the framework. 5 steps. Acknowledge, separate, review, extract, commit. It is not complicated, but it is difficult because every step requires you to override a natural human instinct, the instinct to protect your ego, to avoid pain, to disengage from failure. And overriding that instinct consistently over time is what builds the kind of resilience that most people only read about. Let me close with this. You have already lost. I do not need to know the specifics. I know it because you are human. You have failed an exam, lost a job, ended a relationship, made a decision that did not work out, said something you wish you could take back, tried something that fell apart. You have already lost. The question is not whether you will lose again. You will. The question is what you do with the losses you have already accumulated. Are they sitting in a pile somewhere, unexamined, protected by your ego, slowly turning into resentment or regret? Or are they being processed, honestly, specifically, and with the intention of moving forward? Thomas Edison, the inventor who held over 1,000 patents, once said, and this is verified from his own records, many of life's failures are people who did not realize how close they were to success when they gave up. James Dyson built 5,127 prototypes of his vacuum cleaner before the design worked. 5,126 failures, each one examined, each one learned from, each one bringing him closer to the solution. Michael Jordan was cut from his high school varsity basketball team as a sophomore. He later said, and this is his direct quote, "I have missed more than 9,000 shots in my career. I have lost almost 300 games. On 26 occasions, I have been entrusted to take the game-winning shot, and I missed. I have failed over and over and over again in my life, and that is why I succeed." Notice what Jordan said, not "despite my failures, I succeed." He said, "That is why I succeed." The failures were not obstacles on the path, they were the path. And that is the art of losing forward. It is not about pretending that losses do not hurt. It is not about toxic positivity or forced optimism. It is about developing the discipline, and it is a discipline, to face every defeat with honesty, extract every lesson with precision, and commit to the next attempt with full intention. Itai Liptz did this 13 times in the ring, and then he did it in the classroom, in the boardroom, on the mountain, and in the lives of the children he taught. You can do it too, starting now. Starting with whatever loss is sitting in your memory right now, unexamined and unprocessed. Pick it up, look at it, ask the 4 questions, extract the lesson, and commit to the next attempt. That is losing forward, and it is the most powerful skill you will ever develop. That is episode 4 of the Discipline Code, The Art of Losing Forward. Today we explored why the brain resists learning from failure, what happens neurologically when we lose, and the frameworks, productive failure, the after-action review, growth mindset, and post-traumatic growth that turn defeat into forward momentum. We introduced the losing forward framework: acknowledge, separate, review, extract, commit, and we connected all of it to a professional fight record that proves these principles work, not in theory, but in practice. In episode 5, The Weight Cut Nobody Sees, we go behind the scenes of one of the most grueling and least understood aspects of competitive combat sports. Weight cutting is not just about making a number on a scale. It is about sacrifice, self-control, and the mental discipline required to push your body to its absolute limits for a goal that is still days away. What does the science say about extreme self-regulation? And what does it teach us about the daily sacrifices that separate ordinary effort from extraordinary results? That is next time on the Discipline Code. Until then, do not run from your losses, run through them. That is where the growth lives.